Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of The Era, where we really go deep on the fundamental hypothesis that the employee experience is the key driver of business outcomes and ultimately success in business. This is the conversation that's dominating C-suites and boardrooms across the world. And we're so excited to welcome Dave Carhart, who is the Vice President of Advisory Services at Lattice. And he has led the people function at Lattice for the last 4 years. Now, Lattice is one of our partners here at Bamboo HR, and their mission is to make work meaningful. It's awesome. They talk about how do you turn your employees into high performers, your managers into leaders, and your company into a best place to work. You should check them out. They do a lot of amazing things and have helped a lot of our joint customers really drive their business and their people operations forward. So we're super lucky to have Dave with us, as he's been on the front lines of building culture, teams, and businesses for the last decade in the HR seat. And you think about, he's been really engaged at large companies, startup companies, and so can speak to the entire life cycle of how people, operations, and businesses evolve over time. So, Dave, welcome to The Era. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brad. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation.
So, you've got this amazing history, from a company the size of HP to a high growth company like MuleSoft to Lattice, and really being engaged deeply and actually delivering platforms to the HR teams. What sparked your interest in people in HR? Like, how did you just even arrive here?
So it was pretty early, and it was actually my parents. It was my mom, and when I was in high school and watching her at a company she was at and getting to meet some of the people and see them over the course of a number of years. And it really struck me that there was a way in which this culture that she was in kind of just like drained the creativity and initiative out of the employees. And at some point I kind of looked at that and thought, it's almost like the organization were designed in a way to do that. It was so effective at doing it. And at one point I said to myself, well, what would happen if you designed it the other way? What would happen if you designed it to unleash creativity, to unleash innovation, to tap into the greater potential of people? And I think that kind of sparked me and led me on a long journey over the last couple decades through the HR space.
Yeah, I love just the notion of, what if it were different? As an opening question to setting out on a career journey. That's that's kind of a fun framing question for what the last decade plus has been.
Yeah, and you learn that sometimes you have the ideas and it's tougher to do in practice than you might think it is. But you also you learn a lot of things along the way, having been in the seat and tried to implement things at different companies that open up new possibilities too.
Yeah, being the individual or the team in the arena is very different than the Monday morning quarterback. This is hard to do, which is, I think you think about the audience and the people who are listening to this podcast, many of them are at companies with 2 employees. Others are with 2,000 employees. And you've got this rich experience of having been at small, having been at large. What advice would you give and thoughts, maybe to open up our conversation today on how companies, particularly rapidly growing companies, can scale and grow? What are some key lessons that you've learned in your journey?
So I think there's 3 that really hit home for me. One is that particularly if you're growing, invest in people, infrastructure, including HR, but it's not always about HR. A lot of times it's processes, programs, mindset. Invest ahead, because if you get there and you're feeling at a certain scale and are feeling the pain, it means that you're already behind and are working on catching up. So be willing to invest ahead just before you think that it's truly needed. And the second one is on managers of managers. I think talk a lot with HR folks about managers and manager enablement, I've found that one of the biggest risk areas and the thing that can have the biggest blast radius if you get it wrong is decisions around managers of managers. A new manager with the right kind of training and support and enablement can get a lot of things right the first time. Putting someone, even a decent manager, if they are being directed by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, can get off into just really, really bad places. And so think really hard about how you're creating layers in the organization as you grow. And the third one is just to not try to be everything to everyone. I think it can be easy sometimes, going through a LinkedIn feed and you see all the new benefits and the perks and every program that everyone is doing, to feel like you have to do all of it. But you don't. You need to do what's going to be most meaningful, most impactful to your employees. And there's no company that is doing all of those things. They're each doing specific investments, specific strategies. And so I think focus and prioritization is just really important.
I love those. Those are hard won. That advice is there's some hard won lessons in there, I suspect.
Yeah, there's a lot of failures in getting to those. Absolutely.
And a couple thoughts, because I think the manager question is a really interesting one, and it's a topic that many HR leaders, people leaders are talking about, is like our success or failure is going to depend on those first line managers, and we've got to enable them, as you said. And manager enablement has been a topic I would say people picked up on. You're extending that and saying, not far enough. You've got to really look at either those senior managers or those directors that are directing multiple of these managers, the impact of if you put someone ineffective there who is not enabled properly, the multiplicative impact of that could really submarine the business.
Definitely. And usually that's at a size where you're going to be constrained, where if you're putting in those layers, you probably don't have enough business partners to be having lots of individual meetings with each of those frontline managers. You start to really, really rely on those managers to make a lot of really broad-ranging decisions. And the business as a whole, all the execs, that's at the point when they are needing to delegate a huge number of business decisions. And those roles are just really massively critical.
So I love that. And I've got one question on your number one, on the invest in people ahead of time, tech, people, systems, process. So it's interesting. Over the last, a couple of years, it's been a very tight labor market. Economic growth we've had the wind at our backs pretty much across every sector. And then this year, like, the world kind of hit some economic uncertainty. We don't know if we're headed into recession. And the tone and tenor that comes from companies and people leaders, it seems to have flipped even in just a couple months. What advice would you give about continuing to advocate for companies to invest ahead when everyone's natural business inclination is to pull back on people programs, pull back on stuff because we're entering a recession or whatever people's economic view is?
Yeah, I think a really high percentage of the HR leaders that I talk to right now are going through some type of replan. It's far enough into the year, and there's been enough change in the market that finance, HR, CEOs are sitting down and saying, okay, old plans out the window. Here's the new guardrails for how we're going to operate. Planning ahead, though, and building ahead doesn't always mean, hey, let's take whatever the budget is and double it. It might mean, hey, we know that there are some rocky seas, and here's a number of different scenarios of how that might play out. And here's some of the maybe employee attrition risks that we're going to be seeing as we go forward, maybe as we have more limited compensation budgets, but still tight labor markets. How are we building now, maybe around career development programs or deepening the listening strategy that we have and making sure that we know how people are reacting real time to some of those changes in the market and maybe shifts in strategy, right? So I think, look, financial resources are absolutely an element, and if HR teams are significantly underfunded, companies do see the resulting challenges from that. But when we talk about building ahead and planning ahead, it's definitely about much more than just, hey, how do you take the dollars and increase it, right? It's really about also figuring out, yeah, how to maximize the resources that you have available.
Yeah, I think it is. It gets back to, I just see in, I think those companies that stay focused on, what are those people programs that make a difference on that employee experience. I mean, this is the time to distance yourself when there's a little bit of that economic choppiness. So, Dave, let me ask you a question. You've got kind of some interesting perspectives. What shaped your leadership style around people and around, being an executive at these growing businesses? Are there different HR leaders or other people you bumped into that have helped frame and shape how you operate?
Yeah, I think working under some really, really good HR leaders over the course of my career, I think that's been one of the most important things that shaped my own leadership style. I think, I had a chance to work for Jessica Swank, who's now the CPO at Box, back when we were both at HP together. L. David Kingsley, who's the CPO at Intercom. We were at MuleSoft together, and seeing how folks like that operate, how they can command a room, how they can make hard decisions, that was really critical in my own development. I think the other thing that's really shaped my leadership style is really some of the values of different companies. And I think for me, the test of strength of company values and culture really comes when I leave, and how much of that culture and those values do I take with me into the rest of my career. And I think MuleSoft was built really with radical candor as like a foundational organizing principle, and we memorialized it in the value of be courageous and having the courage to speak honestly and to have hard conversations. That's something it is still hard for me. But when I think about when I come into that type of situation, I still think back to the conversations I had at MuleSoft about that value and what it meant to us. That's been a big shaper for me, and I've been really thankful to work at companies that have really meant and invested in making their values real rather than just a poster on the wall.
I love that, Dave. And your experience now, and you spend a lot of time in HR business partnering. I do want to talk about that, but as you're in an operating role, you're going to have a revenue number in this new role that that you've got to build towards. What's the divide and the understanding gap between HR and other functional roles, the customer set? Like, what does HR not understand about the challenges that are being focused there? And then what does maybe an operating team not understand about the challenges facing HR?
Yeah.
Help us bridge this gap.
I think very often business teams, operating teams don't understand just how much goes into creating a program that they ultimately see, how much in the way of operations and organizing, Tetris with schedules and interacting pieces and processes. I think I only realized how much that was true too once I came to Lattice, because suddenly I was working with teams that actually did know, right? Because they actually spent their days talking with customers about everything that went into a review cycle. And it was the first time I felt a sense of empathy for all of the work that we were putting into something like that. And I think it made me realize how much of a gap there is in that understanding. From the HR side, really, I think it's the understanding the business priorities and all the elements that the operating group itself is working on. A lot of times, huge number of priorities to make impact there. And I think what often as an HR function, we need to do a better job at knowing what those are first, and then figuring out how the HR programs support and reinforce and help shape those things, rather than starting with, hey, here's what we want to do from an HR side. Now let's convince everyone to do it.
Yeah, I think the HR leaders we see that really have an outsized impact are the ones who do exactly what you said, that are good at mapping to the business strategy and then delivering almost like a product manager shipping a
Yep.
product, shipping a an HR program against that.
I will tell you, I have learned so much from working with product teams. I think I've gotten a better view and a lot more exposure than here at Lattice, because we're talking about HR needs and product ideas and things.
Yeah,
And a lot of the ideas in UX research and understanding behavior and
totally.
needs, seeing how they approach a road mapping process, and taking all of the different desires that people have, right? And everyone's coming with their own idea, and being able to shape it into a coherent strategy that everyone's bought in on. I think there's a lot to learn there, on the HR side, from how product teams. I find a lot of commonality too between HR business partner and product manager roles. I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I've learned a lot from engaging with them.
You gave an interview earlier this year where you talked about a learning that you had around hybrid work, and that maybe you could have used some of these principles, like from user testing and different things there. Talk a little bit about, maybe what was, it sounds like was a good learning lesson for you,
Yeah.
but like maybe applying these principles to something tangible that I think a lot of people are wrestling with.
Yeah, I think as we went through figuring out how we were going to approach hybrid work, there were about 3 or 4 different times that we were just sure that we had it right. And every time we did, the world had something else to say. And every time there was a new variant,
We've had the same thing at Bamboo too.
and yeah, and and I walked away from a couple of these experiences thinking more, oh, look, maybe I need to go in planning for more scenarios, like understanding the limits a little bit more of my own knowledge, and even just being willing to be open with employees about that. I think that for a lot of my HR career, and like this experience really did just totally flip me on this approach. For a lot of my HR career, I felt like you had to get something to a state of perfection with the 10-page FAQ and everything. It's all secret until then it just gets, launched on kind of the unsuspecting employees. And what I found as we went further in this process is the more that I was open with the company about what was going on in my own head, about the discussions that we were having as an executive team, some of the things that we just didn't know yet, the more I was open about that, the more that people seemed to come along on the journey with us. And and I think it shifted the tone, right? People felt like, okay, there's a space for my voice in this. There's not something, behind a curtain. I understand what's happening. And hey, there's all these things that Dave and other folks in leadership roles don't know yet. And that's okay, right? Because now that I know that they don't know it, I feel like I can just sort of be, more at peace with this. And so I think it lowered some of the anxiety. And I think we've tried to take that idea of openness and also just experimentation into this next phase. I think I was at a conference, and someone was talking about hybrid work, and they said, look, we're 2 years into a 5-year journey on this. And I think we really are just at the beginning. There's a lot of companies trying a lot of different approaches. Some are going to work, some won't. They're all going to have to evolve. And I think leaning into that and leaning into an experimentation mode and being really open with employees, I think puts companies in a much better position to continue to evolve and update their own thinking, and also to engage employees in the creation process. I think we're past the time where models are defined by HR policies and statements, right? We can give out whatever statements we want, but the models are going to be defined by what managers and employees and everyone does in practice, and we aren't able to direct it, maybe in the way that was needed at a really early stage in the pandemic.
So what's the current state of hybrid at Lattice? Like, now that you're like into some of the learning, like where are you experimenting and what's going on right now?
So we went remote first, and while still leaning into a hybrid model. So basically, anyone can move anywhere in the country. We still have our offices in SF, New York, and London. We're still keeping and investing in those. There's a lot of people that are still living in those metro areas, and they can come in. They'll come in when they want to. A lot of times, what's really getting people together is live social events. People come in for that. Live team meetings. And people get together, especially for kind of a collaboration or working session. And then also we shifted some of the savings that we were getting from how we would have expanded offices and really expanded travel budgets. And so now being more intentional about bringing folks together. And so whether that's at like a team or department level, I'm in our New York office today. We've been doing a roadshow for our customer experience team and having regional gatherings, one in each of the offices where everyone from the West Coast flew to SF, everyone from the East Coast flew to New York. And I think enabling some of that experimentation at a team or department level. The other thing is really trying to talk about communication and meeting norms and making those explicit. And I think that, there's a lot that can focus on the HR policy of things, but what is someone's actual experience, and how does their team work, and how are they able to collaborate? A lot of that comes down to like really hard to define norms. And so we wrote down the principles and norms that we thought should guide communication and meeting structuring, and we've continued to update that over time. And I think I wouldn't in any way say it's perfect, but it's helped us have a conversation about those things.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I know lots of companies were on that journey to figure that out, but I love that you frame that in the experience. And as we talked about, what we spend a lot of time on in the podcast is this employee experience. And what the impact of that is and how you deliver it, because it's there's no one recipe that this works for every company. So in your words, how do you define employee experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. And sometimes, you can say that, like you were referring to there's not necessarily an ideal employee experience in the same way as there's not an ideal product, right? And so really trying to start with, I think, empathy for what's someone's experience, expectations coming in and through their life cycle. And as much as possible, trying to see things from their eyes, trying to hear what they're saying and how they're responding to things. And then figuring out, I think there's a big aspect of anticipating needs and being able to deliver just a little bit more or just a little bit sooner than someone would feel like they really have a need on their own. I think the other element over time, I think I've really learned the power of rigorous operations. I'm not at heart an operations person. I grew up as an HR business partner and was always like, firefighting and like running around on different topics. I think the last company I was at, one of the founders was years ago a manufacturing engineer. Kind of back to our conversation about what I've taken from different companies, and it opened up my eyes about the level that you could take operations to, and how intimately that was tied to what someone experienced on the end. If you can build those, if you can refine those, if you can have continuous improvement processes, there's a lot of the variability or issues with experience that you can take out of the system.
I love that, and love thinking about the employee experience. It's not just about delivering a big bang one time. Like the that operational excellence is you have to show up with an experience every day, every week, every month, every year. Otherwise, you're only as good as what you're currently delivering.
Yes, yes, and there's definitely moments that really matter. There's moments of truth around
Yeah.
promotions and onboarding and birthdays, and like a lot of
Yeah.
places that are, I think, rightly invested with a lot of meaning. But in addition, you're right. Like there's a lot of time and space in between those moments that really shape
Yeah.
what someone's experience is.
So let's dive into a couple topics in and around that employee experience that are, I would say, under pressure today. And the first one I'd love to go into is benefits. And how do you view benefits in the kind of current business world? Where should companies focus on improving? Kind of how's the next couple of years going to play out in terms of benefit delivery?
Yeah, so COVID has just radically reshaped the benefits landscape. It's really shifted people's expectations of what companies should be providing, how much care a company is demonstrating in terms of benefits. And I think then leading into remote and hybrid work, as employees are moving around the country, as many companies are employing people across many more states, countries, that puts a lot of new pressure on benefits, both on things like leave and leave support, but also, one of the things that the office did is it was a delivery mechanism for a whole bundle of benefits, right? And it gave companies this channel to kind of layer in all of these perks, the nearby gym membership and the free food and these different things. And I don't think most companies have figured out how they kind of evolve some of that benefits package into a much more dispersed population. So I think it's all about customization. I will say that I've learned the power of partners in this space in particular. It is a complex space, and sometimes just knowing who to talk to navigate. Again, like we were saying earlier, you don't need to provide. You shouldn't try and provide everything that you see going through your LinkedIn feed, right? What's meaningful for your employees specifically, and and have the conversation. There's always resource limitations, and there will be certainly some of the things that people want that you might not be able to provide right then. But I think if you're able to, the more you're able to customize, the more you're able to then optimize some of your own investment so that you're paying for the things that matter most for different groups of employees.
And it goes back to, I just wrote down your three learnings that you had and the advice you give. And the last one was around ruthless prioritization and narrowing your focus.
Yeah.
Like if you try to peanut butter everything, you're just going to have a generic benefits package that probably doesn't stand out.
Totally. And it feels so hard sometimes as an HR team. Many of us go into HR, right, with a focus on customer service and helping and delivering on people's asks and needs. And so figuring out how to keep that and also put some of the prioritization, kind of an approach to road mapping, figuring out how to make trade-off decisions is I think it is one of the most important things to both to HR success in general and certainly to growing companies and all functions at growing companies in particular.
Yeah. So what's the biggest challenge you've seen of, because this is one I get asked about, is like Brad, like we have all these great benefits, no one's using them.
Yeah.
Like, how do you solve the customer side of that problem on like actual utilization of what gets built?
We need to become better marketers. There is so much that can be amplified in the work that we do, particularly on benefits, but other areas as well. If we are able to better tell the story, and I've tried to learn a lot in my career from the marketing folks that I work with, how they think about communicating and messaging. And I think within HR, as I've grown as an HR leader, it's something that I've tried to put an increasing focus on. And as I've built out HR teams, when at an earlier stage, investing in HR communications and programmatic kind of support and resources around employee experience design. I think it is becoming for mid-sized companies, I think, a growingly sub-function with some really growing importance that is worth investing in.
Good advice there. Let's hit another one in the employee experience, one that I would say has been under pressure in the last 12 months, and that is compensation. In a tight talent market with decades high inflation, what do you see as the biggest challenges that are facing HR leaders as it relates to delivering on the compensation? Probably let's focus on cash compensation as part of an overall total rewards delivery.
Yeah, so companies are needing to adjust their own spend much more quickly than candidates or employees are going to be adjusting their own expectations of what's appropriate compensation, because market is still tight, inflation is still high. And so I think particularly the next 6 to 9 months are going to be really tough on companies that don't have a plan for how they're going to approach compensation, particularly since realistically, there's a lot of HR folks who have never been through a really extended market downturn, right? COVID was a crash and then bounced back, at least for many companies. And so in a lot of cases, there's not recent memory of this. I think that really investing in ensuring that you have a strong compensation and overall total rewards philosophy, that you're really investing in the communication around that, and that you're setting priorities. And I think some of that is deciding what some of the trade-off between cash, equity, benefits going to be, and where are you going to make your investment, and then communicating with employees about that. I think that there's a lot of companies that are going to be caught still totally unaware in November when the New York pay transparency law goes into effect. Any company that is employing people in New York, when they are posting a remote job, will be required to have the pay range on that job because the job could be done in New York. And there's going to be a lot of companies that are waking up on, say, November 1st, suddenly getting emails in their inbox talking about this, and I think thrown into a panic. A comp strategy and structure isn't something that you just throw together over a weekend. And for companies that don't have something in place, this is really the moment that they need to be building that out right now. Because if you're hiring remotely, that's going to be in effect, publishing your entire compensation structure, right? So, figuring out how you're going to approach that and doing so now, I think is just critical.
And how does, you talk about if you're going to be hiring remotely, there has been this great reshuffle.
Yeah.
And people are like, well, And then you have New York companies who are like, well, wait, I can not hire in New York. I can hire anywhere.
Yep.
Like, and so there's this great, kind of reshuffle that's happened really across the world, unlike anything we've seen. What lessons do you think executives, HR leaders can learn from what we're experiencing today?
Yeah. So I think one lesson is that when you dig into the data, like there's certainly things that were new about what was happening or what is happening in the Great Reshuffle. There is, I think, an increased kind of focus on work-life balance and burnout. And also, when you dig into the data, a lot of the drivers are really consistent with what we know about the drivers of employee engagement and retention and attrition from before COVID and from the 10 years before that, right? People care deeply about development. They care about finding meaning in their work. They want a great manager who invests in them, who gives feedback, right? Like there's a lot that is a really similar underlying driver. The difference is the tide's gone out, right? The difference is the pressure on everything and the competition has turned up. And so a lot of existing weaknesses and existing kind of gaps or areas of disengagement that companies might have been revealed in this. And so there's an element where, yes, there's definitely some new things, but I really would not miss, as companies think about, all right, well, what does the world look like in a year from now, right? Or projecting forward. I think one of the big mistakes is there's going to be a group of companies that think, all right, that's done. I'm glad we're back to this other world. It's like, well, no. There's a lot of underlying drivers of engagement or attrition that are going to matter to your future business success. This wasn't just one point in time. There will be future pressures, and we know that even in good environments, even in high growth economic environments, the companies that do better are companies that have invested in their people, have engaged employees, are able to retain them, grow them for the future, right? Like those are some enduring lessons that I think a lot of companies will still take away from these few years.
And what I'm hearing from you, Dave, is like if we were paying attention, anything that's happening in the Great Reshuffle, we wouldn't be surprised by because it was already on our radar screens if we were paying attention to the screen.
Definitely.
And the point is and the lasting value of this isn't a moment in time that it was already around before. It's happening during the Great Reshuffle. But like if let's make it positive.
Yeah.
For those leaders who want to be smart about it, there's an opportunity to use this to advantage your employees, your future employees, and your business over time.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the Great Reshuffle, people aren't just leaving companies. There's someplace they're going to, right? There's winners on the other side of each employee move, and there's companies that as a whole are bleeding talent, and there's companies that are really coming out ahead in this market. And some of the recent job numbers and recent kind of labor reports, what we're seeing is that there's a little bit, just a tiny bit more slack in the market. It's still historically tight, but I think that a lot of folks are going to be in a position to really take what's happening there and come out winners by making these sorts of investments and demonstrating to folks that this is something that they really care about and they're actually going to invest and stay invested in their employees' success.
I love that. So I know we're getting short on time. 2 quick questions. First one is, who do you pay attention to in the HR and people field? Like, are there podcasts? Are there people that like visionaries you think people should be paying attention to?
So I spend a lot of time building my own network and building relationships with a lot of other HR leaders. And so I would say investing time in that. And then a couple of the my former managers and experienced leaders like Jessica and L. David Kingsley that I was talking about really look up to and kind of watch kind of how they're approaching some of the current moments and challenges.
And the last question, if you mentioned like what's going to happen in the next year, you've already kind of breadcrumbed this, but if leaders are starting to think about how I'd like to be positioned as a leader, how I need to lead my business over the next 5 to 10 years, just even in your new role in advising companies on their people strategies, what are we going to be talking about? What's the world going to look like 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think that between COVID, the great reshuffle, the shift to hybrid work, and also just the rise of HR tech, I think that a lot of the trends that we have been talking about within the HR space for a really long time are finally truly coming to fruition. And the impact, the visibility, the strategic impact of the HR function, I think has been permanently changed by the past few years. And I think that one of the things that will really differentiate business leaders is their ability to see that and invest in the HR function in their own companies.
Dave, thank you for the conversation and for joining this episode of The Era. It's been great. I mean, you've dropped some knowledge on us from the beginning all the way through, like what is the role of HR in a business, to some really great perspectives on some of the key challenges that people are facing around compensation and benefits and where the world is headed. Really appreciate you joining The Era. And look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you very much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, Brad.
And for all of our listeners, please tune into the next episode of The Era, again, where we continue to go deep into this notion of employee experience is the most impactful thing that you can do to drive long-term business success, whether you're a small business, a medium-sized business, or a large enterprise. People. So let's continue to grow together and learn together. Thank you very much.